pitch. They call him the safety doc. He's one of the world's foremost experts in school safety and his book, his best-selling book, The School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, was released last week. Dr. David Perrodin and his daughter Mackenzie are here for tonight's first pitch. All right, Doctor, when you make it to the mound, it is your pitch, sir. It would be short-changing Dr. Perrodin to say he's not mildly excited about this pitch, so let's make some noise for him tonight. Congratulations, David. Let's give him one big round of applause.
Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with author, radio host, and nationally recognized safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Join us each week as we discuss the best and most bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. Follow Dr. Perrodin on Twitter @SafetyPhD. And remember, the truth will keep you safe.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. David Perrodin, and welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast. So, what's happened since the last episode? Well, my books arrived. School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, all 204 pages of it. I am very excited. I mean, it looks awesome. Thank you, Roman and Littlefield, my publisher. And I've sent this out, inscribed a number of copies. I've got it out to the member checks, got it out to family members, and it's doing really well. As of today, it was ranked number 1 in its category on Amazon. Now, it's selling as a published book from a publisher. So obviously, the Amazon numbers aren't reflecting the composite of sales to libraries and universities and so forth. And I actually require this book for my fall legal class. So it's doing really well. Check it out. School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America. Again, 204 pages, basically 2 nights, many anecdotes. It's a light read for a heavy topic. Chapter 1, How Thinking About a Bagel Can Get You Through the Worst Day of Your Life. So, mailed those out book rate, which was pretty efficient. I thought it was going to take, like 7 to 10 days. And people, within one state of me were getting their books in like 3 days. And within a week, everybody had their books. So I was impressed by that. Now, I took the books in 2 different sacks down to the post office. And when the guy was printing the labels for postage, the machine jammed like 3 times. So it wasn't busy, which was good. It was in the morning during the week. But I could see his frustration. He's like, ugh. I'm like, okay, dude, I can come back if we have to. Split this into 2 transactions, but it really didn't take that long. I mean, everything weighed the same. I had it all labeled. I'm handing him the books, but yeah, it's just the machine kept jamming on him. So how can you find the book? Everybody asks me this. Well, how can you find the book? Like, what do I have to type in? I'm like, just type in my name. Like, that's all you have to do, literally. Type in my name, right? And the book comes in the, Google panel if you're using a Google search. Otherwise, it comes up in the search like 1,000 times. So you'll have no problem finding it. But I have relatives who are like, what's the name? What's the ISBN number? What's all of them? Like, hey, like, don't make this any more complicated than it needs to be. Like, go into Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, anywhere that sells books, and you can probably get the book. Okay, it's not that elusive. So, I get a kick out of that. And I've been thrilled. I mean, people have been contacting me from all over. Initial shipment of books went out about a week ago, week and a half. People who had pre-ordered the book. But then there was such a demand, there was such a run that they needed to produce, obviously, more books and change the official release date. It had bounced around from August 1st to August 7th. It initially was August 10th. So it's a point where even I can't get a hold of additional books right now. They need to run through the presses and fulfill orders that are waiting. So it's really good for me to have that happen. But excited, really excited. I've given it one read through. Just so appreciative of everybody that contributed. The member checks who allowed me to, quote them in the book, and then just the reviewers who were brutally honest with parts of the book. And I had one chapter, I literally printed it off and cut it into strips and put it out on a kitchen table, reordered it, put some different headings down and stuff. So because, getting feedback initially in those formative stages. And that's the benefit, when you do that versus, I think, just going directly into self-publishing. Is you have those member checks when you're working with a publishing house. And I also worked to bring in those member checks. Not that you can't. I mean, there's some awesome self-publishers, just as there are awesome people who have published and people who have published it hasn't been that great for them, But what I'm saying is the member checks, people that go through it. So by the time you get it, I mean, it's been really checked for readability. The content is clear. So it's exciting. School of Airs, you can buy it. And I donated 2 copies to my hometown library where I grew up, which is a beautiful library. Most of it was donated by one of the philanthropists in town. It was built about, I don't know if it was 10 years ago, but it's a beautiful facility. And donated 2 books, and then I'm doing an author event there, and then in another adjacent community of about 50,000 people. And then they actually asked me to come in and present to their library system about school safety and then just safety in general. Like maybe what would you do in a library if something was happening, or you observed erratic behavior by someone, some statements, internet searches, residue. How would you interface with that person or interface with authority? Which I thought was fascinating. Like I hadn't intended to do that with the library system, so they approached me and I said, yeah, I'd be glad to be part of your in-service. They have an in-service day, which I didn't even know that existed. I didn't know how that whole system worked, right? So I'm going to be putting together this presentation for this greater library system. So Crisis Response Journal accepted an article I wrote about the Notre Dame Cathedral fire. And I wrote it within days of the fire. And I was frustrated because the initial alarm, somebody climbed up many stairs, takes a long time to get up there, but then they didn't find anything. So they're just like, well, the alarm malfunctioned in the computer system, whatever, and they just went back down. And then, it's half hour later and the alarm sounds again and they go up and then it's too late. The fire's starting to rage. So I write the article, and it's about 1,000 words, talking about how when you investigate, you have to investigate to a conclusive result. right? Like if it's the Notre Dame Cathedral and you have, this, 900-year-old incredible, wood lattice work, rafter system holding this up, holding up that lead roof. Wouldn't you walk from one side to the other and have a flashlight? And wouldn't you also have like an infrared detector that you would walk through that area with? It just seems like that's all common sense, right? You wouldn't get up there and say, well, I don't see anything, I don't smell anything, so I'm not going to walk the distance to check out what's going on. Like, that just doesn't make sense. So I wrote an article saying, we just get this complacency that it's self-similarity, right? Every day is going to be similar to the last. Things won't typically happen that are chaotic. So this alarm, probably a malfunction, would have returned to normal. So we get that. And what we need to do, though, is we need to investigate everything to an absolute conclusion. So it's a really brilliant, kind of cheeky piece. They loved it. I was excited. I've never published with Crisis Response Journal. For me, that's, also very enticing as a public, as someone who authors works for journals, to have more exposure to a different audience. And I really enjoy Crisis Response Journal. So I'm feeling really great about that. That article will come out in August, and I had an article that was released by Kappan Journal, Wino Safety Drills for Students with Special Needs. That was very popular. So, getting out there. I've always done a lot of journal articles in my life, and now I'm getting into some new journals. I appreciate that. So I didn't know this. This is just kind of a point of curiosity, right? So I learned that you can take a tour of Chernobyl. And I'm thinking the whole thing is like, it's the perimeter is huge and you can't get in. And if you do get in, you have to have just a very limited exposure, but that's not the case at all. You can look online and you can just find these tour agencies where, for the right price, and it's not prohibitive, you can spend several hours in Chernobyl. And actually, like, they bring food in, and I think you eat within one of the buildings. And people kind of just tour the neighborhoods that are around there. But you're actually within a couple hundred yards of where the reactor that melted down was. It's I can't imagine this, but it's true. Like, there's many videos of it, and it's kind of a neat thing to do, right? If you ever had an opportunity to tour Chernobyl, and apparently the level of radiation you receive is the same as if you did like a cross-country flight, or like one X-ray or something like that. I don't know. It's pretty insignificant, which I was also surprised. I thought it'd be higher than that. But yeah, imagine taking a Chernobyl tour. I don't know. I think I would probably do it for curiosity's sake, and I'd have to triple check that it was authentic. You weren't going in there and getting this massive dose of radiation. But it's wild. It's wild. And one thing they say is they'll come into buildings, and there'll be like some beds, because Chernobyl I think was 86, and then it'll be like the moment everybody evacuated. But they said that's just staged. Everything has been looted several times over, and so when you go into any areas in Chernobyl, it's pretty much a photo op. It's been set up for you, which I thought was kind of interesting. But yeah, Chernobyl tours. So if you don't know where you're going next year, Chernobyl tour. I've had some comments on the YouTube channel here for the Safety Doc podcast. I really appreciate it. It's people are commenting about the content, commenting specifically about the episode where I talked about with James Sibley, Attorney James Sibley, excluding students with disabilities from safety drills. Very rich commentary about alternatives to the typical, blaring horns and white strobe lights that are happening. And the fact that one of the contributors indicated he actually worked with his local school district to replace those. And yeah, I didn't know that was happening out there, and I didn't know what the acceptable replacements were, but obviously that is something in my next book as far as drill safety and making sure that we have drills that aren't traumatizing students and staff. It's going to involve the notification system because, it seems that there is a way to also do this that isn't so terrifying and frightening. So I'm going to contact that person specifically and get some more information, do a little more research on my own. My July 3rd presentation on Wednesday night at the lab, Wisconsin Public Television, was and is the third most viewed episode of the last 60 episodes. So I'm thrilled about that. And the numbers keep climbing. I don't know how they hashtagged it out in the different cross promotion that happens with that episode, but it's really doing well. So yeah, being the third most viewed out of the last 60 episodes bodes well for a return of the safety doc for Wednesday night at the lab in Wisconsin Public Television. That's actually being edited and prepared for syndication this fall. So they'll edit it down to 58 minutes, which is where I ended outside of the little YouTube mishap I had, but they'll clean that up. And then the question and answer section gets taken off of that. So that's really cool. Excited about that because then that becomes the national stage. But yeah, the raw show, everything, including the question and answer, is the third most viewed out of the last 60. So thank you so much.
A must-read for parents, teachers, and taxpayers. Dr. David Perodin has written the most honest book about the $3 billion school safety industrial complex. Attorney James Sibley proclaims, a brave demonstration of speaking truth to power. School of Errors rips the lid off the billion-dollar school safety industry. Using real-world examples of successful responses in desperate situations, David contrasts the expensive window dressings pitched to panic parents with the inexpensive and effective approaches proven to actually work. Read this book before you let your school waste another precious dollar on meaningless safety theater. Buy the international bestseller, School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, now at Barnes & Noble or Amazon.
I updated my website, safetyphd.com, and it was more out of, it was out of necessity because the site had last been updated in 2017. The book was coming out, so I needed the content to be current because people would say, if I did an interview, they'd say, well, where can people learn more about you? I'd be like, well, safetyphd.com. So I need to scramble and just update the images and the narrative. And it's a system, it's WordPress in GoDaddy. And I'm not that familiar with WordPress because somebody built the site for me. Like I gave them the content and someone I know, a friend, created the site, but I couldn't keep going back and saying like, can you do the updates and whatever? So I watched tutorials and I figured out how to do the updates and make it so now I have School of Errors as one of the menu options on the top that you can go and click and get right to the book. But yeah, the site really has a nice look. I didn't pay the $100 a year to get the little green secure thing, so Google will say not secure, but I don't sell anything off of the site, so I'm not going to do that. It's really it houses my blog that goes along with these podcasts and some information about me, but yeah, I'm not going to pay the $100. It seems like that's like a $15 deal, right? I'm paying $100 to have the secured thing on there. I don't pay that much for the site. So nope, not happening. I tossed out the first pitch at the Duluth Huskies baseball game on July 31st at historic Wade Stadium in Duluth, Minnesota. The Huskies hosted the Lacrosse Loggers and won 11-5. The Huskies had two monster home runs. Their players, great team, first place. Wade Stadium, just a beautiful place to watch baseball. Built in 1941 as a CCC project. They restored it a couple years ago, but it still has the feel of a stadium that was built in the 30s. They didn't go all crazy jazzy with it, like the contemporary stadiums that are built, which are more like amusement parks than just the true heart of baseball. Just a great place. So I got to go out on to the pitcher's mound with my youngest daughter and throw out a pitch. And I put a video up. So I have two YouTube accounts. I have the David Perodin one, which is typically my university lectures go up there. And the Safety Doc one, which is what you're watching right now if you're on YouTube, or it's where my Safety Doc podcasts are. So I put this one over on my personal site. And it's just a minute and like 25 seconds or something like that. But it's kind of fun, if you want to check it out. Because, there's a little bit of music, a little bit of organ music, crowd stuff, getting out. It's a AstroTurf field, so it's kind of cool to walk out there. And I didn't embarrass myself with the first pitch, so felt pretty good up there on the mound. And it was just so... I felt happy for the players. I mean, if these guys are like 20 years old and they're out there playing, this Northwoods League, it's like minor league baseball, and what fun that absolutely has to be, right? If you're that age, you get nice crowds turning out, you get to visit these different areas. It's just really cool. So I was thrilled to be a part of it. The franchise honored me for my career work in school safety. And behind me, I snagged, this is a 1919 Western Electric candlestick phone. So it doesn't have a rotary piece on it. So underneath is the bell box. This thing is heavy. So the bell box like 20 pounds, the phone's like 5 pounds. But yeah, it actually... this was picked from a home in Wisconsin as an estate sale about 10 years ago, and I bought it from the man who picked it. So he and his father worked together, and this is what they do. And so I was able to get it from him at a terrific price. I think he was just appreciative that he knew it was going to a place where I'm going to use it in the show as a backdrop. But also I'm going to use it when I go out and present on school safety, as long as I'm not flying, because I can't take this thing with me. But if I'm driving anywhere, I'm going to take this with and talk about communication being critical to school safety, and the fact that this was communication 100 years ago and what that meant. And let's just talk about communication now. But I'm just going to go back here. And of course, yeah, you move the mouthpiece, and then you put it back on. It's like this really, I forget what the name of it is, but it's really heavy plastic. Again, so this is 100 years old, 1919 by Western Electric. Just a really cool piece. I looked for that quite a while, but online there's replicas, and then otherwise they're all out of places like the Ukraine or something, and you just don't know the authenticity. So this thing, yeah, is genuine. And it was initially installed in Wisconsin, so I have a little bit of the backstory on it, but I'm really thrilled to get it. I just think it adds a lot. I'm not sure where I'm going to move it down here in the studio. I need to do a little updating down here in time, and it will definitely have its place. So yeah, it's going to be in the backdrop. It replaces the man carrying the rock, which I might move somewhere else. But I really wanted the phone because, again, the show and safety is so much about communications. And a shout out to the sponsors here of the Safety Doc Podcast. The 405 Media out of Los Angeles, California. John Grant and the 405 Media bringing you the Safety Doc Podcast at 2 p.m. PST daily. Again, coming out of Los Angeles, California. Also, Radio and Podcast. radioandpodcast.com. Jim Mallard. It is a phenomenal radio podcast station. So just check out Radio and Podcast. You won't be disappointed. And Jim has had, Roger Stone on his show. So many more. I'm coming back in just a week. Wow. Spark Radio Net, Spark Radio Denver, Washington, New York. Also syndicating out the Safety Doc Podcast. A big shout out to our good friends there at Spark Radio. All right. So you are going to start a school safety conference. So why would you want to do that? Well, let me give you my story. Back around 2009, 2010, 11, 12, I was big into conferences. I actually started a conference maybe around 2003, 2004, which still gets about 500 attendees to this day. So I knew how to start a conference. I knew how to found a conference. I held myself to a high standard for the quality of presenters, the content, just that a conference was very professional in its design and nature. So, you have to be ethical to run a conference because, people are giving their time and they're giving their money to you. I always maintained that standard, but that standard has eroded significantly today. And I know that as someone who presents at conferences, I know what's happening at conferences. So let's talk about that. The $3 billion school safety industry, again, I kind of argue it's $5 billion because I think a lot of school referendums, renovations kind of roll into this and they don't show up specifically on the books as school safety. But again, if you put a referendum out there and the word school safety is in it, it probably will pass. But let's talk about, we have this multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's an offshoot of that, which is conferences. And you're starting to see conferences rebadged as conventions, because what sounds more official? What sounds more prominent? A conference or a convention? Well, convention, right? So we see conventions, conferences, but it's the same thing, but people are starting to realize if we call it a convention, it just seems to put it on a pedestal, all right? So how does a conference or a convention, but how does a conference make money? So I'm going to give you the inside because I did this. I know. Here's some different sources. One is the attendees. So people pay to attend a conference. Let's say it's a 2-day conference. Maybe they're paying anywhere from $300 to $400. You would think that's like a really big source of money. But you also have vendors. And at a conference hall, you might be able to accommodate anywhere, depending upon the hall, 20 to 50 to 100 vendors. I think the most I ever had at a conference was maybe about 30. So if you're having vendors, come to your conference, they're paying anywhere between, $500 to maybe $5,000 for their spot at that conference, which might be a table outside of conference halls, which might be its own exhibition room, like a 10,000 square foot, space or something like that they have an area designated. So vendors bring in a lot of money for school safety conferences. That's not exactly new. I mean, that's always happened, but it's changed. And I'm going to get into that. It's a different type of vendor. Also, sponsors. So you can sponsor out anything these days. You can sponsor your breaks. This break is brought to you by whoever, okay? And then you badge it in your mailers and your online, your website and stuff like that, and say, hey, especially if you go to like insurance companies, major food chains, they want to be associated with school safety, and this is a great way for them to do it. And that was always remarkably easy, actually, for me, or even like electric and, power and gas companies of saying, hey, running this, it's for example, school safety, and it also is going to be attended by people that use your products. And in most cases, they would sponsor a break. They would sponsor a presenter, like our keynote presenter. Your keynotes are your most expensive presenters. Your keynote could be brought to you by whatever, or a bank. Socials, they would sponsor food for the evening, food and beverages. Sometimes they'd sponsor meals. They would sponsor entire sessions. So if you think of it, you can sponsor it. It's wide open. And I was just very good at that. So sponsors, here's another revenue source. University credits or continuing education units. University credits was really big until about 2011-ish. In Wisconsin, for example, you were no longer required to pass or take university credits to maintain your license after 2011. Some school districts still had that as their way to advance teachers up the pay scale, but then that kind of faded out from everyone. But people have to still maintain, if you're a physical therapist, occupational, speech language, continuing ed units, school districts a way to advance teachers through salary lanes, and a lot of it is tied to professional development. So there's still some appeal to this, not as much as there was. But again, I remember, and how this typically would work is you'd have a partnership with a university, and the university would, if you charged, $200 for one credit, or whatever, $600 for 3 credits, the university would take like 60% of that, and then they would give 40% back to the institution or the organization that was putting on the conference. So when working and founding a conference, I always had a fiscal agent. I was always working with someone else, co-founding it, and then their agency would serve as a fiscal agent, meaning that they would pay the bills, pay for the presenters that they would take in the registrations. Like, you didn't do that just personally. There wasn't an organization you worked through. But yeah, so revenue, attendees, vendors, sponsors, university credit. So you have a lot of sources to pull in a lot of money. Expenses for a conference. Exhibition space that's going to be a big cost for you. Food is a huge cost. And the conferences want you to have your attendees eat there. Okay, they want them to stay on site because, food is a big moneymaker, and so do the vendors. The vendors don't want your participants going off-site to eat. I'll talk about in a little while. You can do that when you design a conference as a way to cut cost a little bit, but it really is kind of a bad move, and most big conferences won't do that. They'll keep you on site. Audio, video, so if I'm renting a screen and using the projector, if I'm using a PA system, their house PA system, I'm paying for that, and that's not cheap. Paying for the presenters, paying for their lodging, their transportation. The bigger keynotes you get, they expect you to pick them up at the airport. So that's the arrangement. You have somebody go down, meet them at the airport, take them back. You have to give them good lodging. So you go upscale with them in addition to whatever fee that you are paying them. Someone has to take them back to the airport. Marketing, okay. Working to get your flyers put together, your mailing list, purchasing your mailing list, doing your postage and all of that, and then your websites and email. So people have to do that. Now, when you're grassroots, you can do a lot of this. Like I designed out the mailers, worked locally with a company to get them, got the addresses and things like that. So a lot of weekends, actually, I would work putting things together. Organizations putting on the events. We talked about the fiscal agent. If someone is processing registrations, they're going to need to be compensated for that. So if they have someone on staff and that person is spending, 5 or 10 hours a week processing registrations, you're going to have to compensate that person for their time and their cost. And then event staff, people that you have there on the day of the event or the day before helping to set up. So those are the expenses. Probably, again, the biggest one, your exhibition space and also food. Food is very expensive.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perodin. Author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
9-0. Post-game show is brought to you by Christ, I can't find it. The hell with it.
Negotiables for a conference. Okay, negotiables. So keynotes can double dip if they're working for usually like a state agency or a company. They'll have built into their contract, in a lot of cases, okay, they'll have built in that they can present, maybe 5 days a year, and they can also be compensated for that. So it is double dipping. It's not it is double dipping. And I've seen contracts like that. So then when you're bringing someone in, if they're already being paid for the day, and let me say why this would happen and why you would allow someone to get their daily rate of pay plus be paid to present. It brings a credibility to the agency where that person works. And it makes, if you have, for example, a superintendent or somebody with, whatever public organization in a very prominent position and they're going out and presenting it, it lends more credibility to them and brings that back to your company or your agency. So there is incentive to do that because you can say this person presented at whatever, and then they're also making connections while they're out there. So you might be getting some additional business if it is a business, or else it just, again, is reflecting very well upon your organization to have this person in this sought after position. So yeah, if a keynote, though, is in a double dipping role, you might be able to negotiate a better price because maybe they're getting their daily rate and they're getting some compensation for, mileage or flight or whatever from their employer. So you can say, in addition to that, we'll do, this much. Those people are usually not that expensive overall once you consider that they're already being paid for the time that they're with you. Also, hey, if they can sell their books or pitch their consulting service, they'll go for that. Anything to advertise themselves or their product if they're more independent. So know what you can exchange with people, okay? It's the whole kind of negotiation, never split the difference, Chris Voss. Everybody has a vested interest. So if you can say, hey, I'm going to give you access to this number of people and this whole new market that you'd be able to, have for example, your presentations, you're going to get invited to more conferences. That's appealing to people if they know that. So if you can get 200 or more people to stay at a conference center, you're going to get a break off the facility. Sometimes if you get like 500 people, they'll give you the facility for free. So it's something else you can negotiate at a conference. I always worked on that. What's the threshold? Like if we have this many people, what can we get off? Because if you go during an off season and they don't have many people typically staying in the rooms and you can bring business in, that's a good thing. I also think, you can comp vendors. I've done this a few times. If it's someone that's going to add value to the event, I'll waive the vendor fee. And I did this a few times. One was a parent group who were training parent liaisons to help school districts. So if a school district had a challenging parent that they were interacting with, this liaison group could kind of work as a middle person in that. And usually people who don't trust districts will trust parent liaisons, who are affiliate with the districts. So, that had its part. And then also there was a man who sold art, and I don't know what his area of disability was, but it was a fascinating story because he was pretty profoundly impacted for his entire life and was cared for by his parents, who was like in his 60s and was at like an assisted living center or something like that. And they had an arts and crafts project, and they realized this guy's an artist. Like he's making this incredible artwork. And he had a website and someone was working with him. I don't know if it was Department of Voc Rehab or what it was, but this beautiful artwork. And they contacted me and said, could he, can we buy a table? And I was like, I talked it over with the other people I was running the conference with. And I said, I just want this guy here because I want to tell that story of how, we kind of discover people at different points in their life. And just because you have a disability doesn't mean you don't have capability. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And then I bought one of his paintings, which I have actually displayed down here in the office. But I didn't want to charge him. He was just getting started. I wanted this exposure because it was very germane to the conference topic, which the conference was the Great Lakes Behavioral Summit, and it was held in the Midwest. But to have him there and to embody kind of the whole point of we need to really understand people, and whether adults or kids, and give them different ways to express themselves. And with this man, it was later in life that this talent was uncovered, and thankfully in time for him to, produce paintings and make this incredible contribution. So it's kind of cool. But I always did that. I always made sure we had some people, whether they were kind of up and coming or I just felt would be very essential to adding value to the event. So another thing I did, hey, if you're a vendor, I required you to donate things to the prize drawings. Okay. So it could be your product, or it could be something that you would, purchase that, we would put in then. So, for example, you could donate a $50 Amazon gift card. So we had a lot of drawings, right? So, maybe 50 people walked away from our conference with something of value. So you talk about negotiables. When you have local presenters, typically you don't have to pay them a fee. They're just happy for the exposure. They can drive there. If you give them the conference for free, that's like a gift in of itself, right? $300, $400 conference. So you can kind of comp them out the conference, not any lodging, but just, their registration. And then, you've got them. And it also grounds that conference where you just don't have people talking who are just going to fly out 1,000 miles and you'll never see them again. You've got people who, literally you could drive to their district and meet with them. Pretty cool stuff. So negotiables, you can sell breakout sessions to vendors. I did that a few times. If I felt that it was adding value. And I only did it a handful of times. So any conference that I was participating in, you could expect 20% or less of breakout sessions to be run by a vendor. And I would always make sure the vendor submitted the presentation to me ahead of time. So if it was someone presenting on, two-way radios or something like that, I didn't want the presentation to be about their two-way radio product. And I was very clear about that. And I always roamed session to session for breakouts. The presentation had to be about the purpose of two-way communications in schools and in crisis situations. And at the end, it was fine for them to say, this is what we do as a company. But the presentation itself was, this is what a basic communication system looks like. And if you, for example, used a phone is one-to-one, one person to one. If you use a radio, it's one to many people. And then they talk about how radio systems work, what a repeater is, and why that's important, and then the different ComSec, communication security, things like that. So it's very practical, important, relevant information. So it makes them be perceived as an expert in their field versus someone who's just put before you to convince you. You have to have radios because, every school needs to have this system in case there's an intruder or something like that, which is kind of like what happens right now. So I held people to that standard, and people did very well with that. They appreciated that, I think, being able to be intellectual versus just pitching a product. And if they couldn't hit that threshold, I'd be like, no, I can't. It's not going to be a 50-minute sales pitch for you. Also, go to your local chamber of commerce, especially in the off season, and say, hey, I'd like to bring this conference here. We're looking at 300 to 500 people. If it's successful, we're going to do it on an annual basis. And I realize this isn't your busy time of year. What can you do as a chamber? And the chamber will sometimes put money out there and say, here's money to get started. Or we are going to donate, coupons to your raffles so people can go to restaurants at night and, get out in the community and, add to the economic viability of that community during kind of an off season. So it's pretty cool. And we talked about that whole attendees thing. You can turn them loose for lunch, but you probably don't want to do that because, again, the vendors want the people there. But at the times when they do, you have conferences and people go out to lunch, there's usually deals worked out with proximal restaurants around that area. So people, if they bring in their name ID from the conference, they might get 15% off or something like that. So you can always kind of work it. So that's the nuts and bolts of conferences. And I really enjoyed designing and running conferences. A lot of work to do it right and to do it in an ethical manner, to find the presenters who are going to enrich and meet the themes of what you're doing, watching their stuff ahead of time. Everyone has things on YouTube, calling places that they've been, looking at their materials. But what's happening today? The change today. There's a huge uptick in the number of school safety conferences because there's $3 billion out there for school safety. So there's conferences all the time. I get Google alerts every day on school safety conferences, and they're everywhere. They're everywhere. And most of them are response side, meaning the presenters, the vendors are law enforcement, Secret Service, FBI, surveillance cameras, bollards, bulletproof films, things like that. So it's response side, not prevention side, response side. You're also losing the people like me, like the researchers, the authors of safety books, they're just not in vogue anymore. And they're probably going to say the truth. And the truth is, we can't fortify our way to safety. So you're not going to bring in a keynote or a featured presenter who is going to say something that doesn't align to all of this money coming in from your vendors who are out in the hallway and probably your sponsors to some extent. But no, that's just not happening. So what is happening right now is vendors basically are buying presentation slots. So you come in and you have these big response side, FBI, former military, whatever, give this talk, and which really probably doesn't have a lot to do with school safety. It just has to do with some crisis response or whatever. And yeah, everyone is just enamored by them. So there's little supporting research that attending a school safety conference translates into increased school safety. And it's difficult to find any learning objectives in these conferences. It's meaning people go to these things and they're really not better off for going to these things because it's just a full press marketing expo right now. They are being sold things. And the sessions, again, become response side keynotes who aren't specifically talking about school safety, but something, FBI, Secret Service, whatever. And, it looks good. People are like, oh, yeah, I got to go see that. But really, your better option for that, if I'm a school administrator, your better option is to have your teachers stay on campus at your school. Break it up so you have a morning and an afternoon, and they're taking some of the free FEMA Emergency Management Institute courses, which are very well put together. So maybe they're taking a course on instant command system and, another one on some type of school safety response. There are numerous courses out there, but you could have them do that. And you could also break it up into, the learning objectives are already laid out in those courses, and you can have a discussion afterwards. But you might find yourself with a whole bunch better value than sending your teachers off to some place where they're going to become convinced that because their school doesn't have the latest surveillance camera system, it is a dangerous place. Vendors also, so conferences, again, they're run by vendors. Vendors are putting huge money out there, thousands of dollars. And they are getting premier space, premier access to administrators and to educators and the school board members. They're also doing breakout sessions. So the keynotes, again, FBI, things like that are coming in. Keynote sessions are basically marketing. It's marketing. So you're just being marketed. You're basically going to a store, or like I compare it to, we have a boat show at the Alliant Energy Center in Madison, Wisconsin, where it's just, they just bring in boats. And that's all you're doing. They're trying to sell boats to you, right? They're not teaching you about water safety or anything like that. It's just like, buy this boat. A 2-day conference of 400 attendees right now can net $100,000 or more. Probably pretty easily you can net $100,000 or more on a conference. My conferences always did very well. I always kept them in a appropriate price range, but the conferences did very well. Money coming back to the agency, but then also the agency is giving me more days to work on more conferences, which I liked to do. But so let's look at some of the numbers. 400 attendees probably charge $400, including meals included. So that's $160,000 coming in. Your vendors, at least $30,000 from your vendors, probably much more than that. So, a 1-day table might be $500. Let's say at 10 of those, $5,000. 2-day table, 20 of those, $750 for 2 days, $15,000. And if you, added a breakout session, if you said, you can have one breakout session, but it's going to cost you $1,000 more. Probably have 10 people take you up on that at least. And sponsors, again, your power company, food banks, things like that, that's $10,000. They'll write it off. It's a charitable contribution, if you're a nonprofit, but they want to show, they definitely want to show that they're involved in school safety and making their communities better. They have money allocated for things like that. So that is definitely out there. And again, they're going to sponsor maybe a presenter. They're going to sponsor breakouts. Law firms, my goodness, like they'll do that too. Like you go to law firms that work with schools and, hey, would you do this? Yeah. Even like the schools, like 401k company. I mean, you can just exhaust this. So, right there, that's a gross revenue, $200,000. You maybe like have, again, $100,000 in expenses between you're going to have to pay the facility cost. You're going to have to pay for meals. You're going to have to pay some of your keynote presenters. But again, we're looking at about $100,000 off of a conference of about 400 attendees. And that's small, right? Because some of these conferences might have 1,000 people or more attending them. And actually, once you get above a threshold, you just start to generate more revenue because it costs less if you're doing, more mailers or more packets, or if you can take things and put them all on a thumb drive, all of the handouts, instead of having to print them. Well, the more thumb drives you buy, the cost of the thumb drives lowers and stuff like that. So again, what is happening right now? People like me, and this has happened to me, I've been offered the keynote at prominent conferences, and then I'll be contacted and say, we're going to go with the person who retired out of the FBI. And I'm like, I don't even know who this person is, but okay. And they're going to give this presentation about, whatever in the FBI, because people see that it looks, and also once I give my materials on what I'm going to present on, because people, my name is easily affiliated with school safety in a search. But then when I submit my presentation materials, they think, yeah, we're not going to have this guy, though, talk about how we can use Kim's game and how we can use situational awareness practice to really get at the heart of school safety. When we have $30,000 coming in from vendors or more in the hallway, that's not what they're about. They're selling the window films. So we've got to all have the same tune. They're calling the tune and I'm not singing it if I'm doing that. So it's weird. It's weird to kind of go through that because it's great stuff, but people don't want the empirical side. So I look at these conferences, I look who's presenting, and if you're seeing FBI, Secret Service, military, things like that, it's not appropriate for a school conference. These folks are not intently and intensely studying schools for the most part. They're just not. But they're being brought in because, again, people believe, well, these are the experts then in safety. And look at the message they're sending. Look at who the vendors are. Look at who the sponsors are. And you can see pretty fast in a lot of conferences and more conferences today than ever, it's really marketing. It's vendors. And they are completely just trying to sell you fortifications and maybe fancy apps. All response side, nothing prevention side. So it's really a dangerous world right now in school safety because the money's out there. People go to these conferences and the indoctrination happens more and more with the rhetoric and fueling the panic of you have to buy this. You have to buy this and we'll show you some fancy demonstration and we'll give you this great tote bag and whatever else. But you have to buy this. This is what it's about. It's not about educating you. It's about marketing and convincing you to buy our product. Hey, everybody. This is Dr. David Proden, School of Errors. Check it out. My book. Thank you so much for your support and for following on Twitter at SafetyPhD. Subscribe here to the Safety Doc Podcast. Again, this is David Proden. Thank you so much, everybody.
This has been the Safety Doc Podcast with author, radio show host, and leading safety expert, Dr. David Perodin. Remember to check back each week for the latest, best, and most bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. You can find Dr. Perodin on Twitter @SafetyPhD. And remember, the truth will keep you safe.